Mountain climbing has a very narrow symbolic function in our culture. For one, it's extremely perilous. You can navigate your way up Mount Everest using abandoned dead bodies as place markers. But also important is how little reward exists at the end of mountain climbing. It's a sport with no championship. There's no money in it, unless you want to be a Sherpa, and they don't seem to be doing so hot. Once you get to the top of a mountain, there's really nothing left to do other than to go home. But that is the joy and pleasure, or even the peace, of mountain climbing. It's pushing yourself to the limit of safety and physical stress, all the way up this colossal thing, and then reaching a point where there is truly nowhere left to go. When you're at the peak of the mountain, only emptiness lies in front of you. The idea is that once you get to the top, the reward is simply the absence of more things to do. It's a moment of total clarity and peace. You did it. Celeste is a game about climbing. At its best, it captures that feeling of slow but sure progression to an evaporating endpoint. But Celeste is also a game about nostalgia. And it's a game about Instagram. And it's a game about mental illness. And it's kind of a game about confidence. And, well, you get my point. Celeste loses focus as it carries on. Level by level, you can feel the game starting to fragment at the seams. And probably the biggest fragmentation is its strange choice to rely on pixel art. Now look, to an extent I get it. A lot of indie developers are starting to rely more and more on pixel graphics because they're cheap to produce and they're easy to iterate. On top of that, pixel-based game design is very, very clear and clean to the eye. We can understand what you're trying to do without needing much handholding. The more realistic graphics become, the more pressure is on the game designer to keep us going in the right direction, to make sure that we understand how to do things, especially in a game that it features something like pinpoint jumping. It would be very hard to execute some of the tasks that you perform in Celeste with a more complicated graphics package. But there are still alternatives to pixel art. One example that jumps out at me is Hollow Knight, a game in which pixel art would have been a horrible decision, that instead chose a very simplistic but nuanced illustration package to do ostensibly the same thing. There are even climbing sections in Hollow Knight that are, I would argue, more difficult than anything you encounter in Celeste and involve much more stipulation, and they work out fine. So then I return to, why? Why is this game trying to evoke the nostalgia of like an 80s platformer? Perhaps it's that Celeste itself is a platformer. I suppose you could argue that. But to argue that is also to deny that platformers haven't been made in a modern era. Even Nintendo has moved off of 8-bit style platforming games. Or maybe you could argue that it looks cool. This is something I've seen in a lot of reviews of Celeste. And they aren't incorrect. The art in Celeste is gorgeous. This is a game that if you like pixel art as much as I do, you're going to be really impressed. The level of detail and personality injected into Celeste art is lacking in many AAA games. And you could also say that the retro feel is bolstered by the music, which is equally wonderful. The music of Celeste is a mishmash of chirps and blips, combined with modern dance music. It's designed to evoke both a nostalgic and a modern feel. But none of those things answer the question of why. They just answer the question of how. They certainly tell me that all the departments active in Celeste did their job, and did their job very effectively. And that's a compliment to the game. But that doesn't mean Celeste is a very well-directed video game. A lot of people don't understand what role a director serves in a piece of art, be it a film or a play or a game. And in the video games industry, the role of a director is particularly strange because this is such a new business model. The most important aspects of good directing are invisible. They're the things the director didn't want. A director's job is to synthesize all the major departments in a collaborative art effort. Their job is to convey a message to the musicians, to the artists, to the programmers, of what this game is and what it's not. Directing is keeping everyone on task even as their creative whims pull them in a million different directions. And so while I can look at Celeste and say, the art is beautiful, the music is wonderful, I own some of the songs, even the story, which made my eyes roll a little bit, conveys a positive message and certainly deepens the game. But none of these elements have been synchronized. And that leaves us with a version of Celeste that feels trapped. It feels like a blend, an uncanny blend of a nostalgia game with a modern platformer. And neither of these parts fit together in any coherent way. It might be worth wondering if the designers even understood that they were appealing to nostalgia in the first place. Has pixel art reached a point where it's a language all its own? And even though it is designed to reference the past, does it instead reference the present?